It seems like just about every day in the news, we're hearing about things going on in Israel, things going on in Palestine. Are Arabic nations about to jump in and fight the battle? Are we going to end up in World War III? Is this thing going to fizzle out? To help me understand all of this, I have with me author Robert Spencer. Robert, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Stephen. Good to see you.
So, just a little background on you for my viewers. Robert has authored close to 30 books. He's an expert in Islamic topics and jihad. He's taught the FBI about Islam, the Middle East, jihad, so that they can understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of interacting with the Middle East. Robert, I wanted to ask you. I read online that many believe that you understand Islam better than most practicing Muslims. I'm not going to pretend to know much about Islam other than it's one of the three Abrahamic faiths. But let's talk about this war going on between Israel and Palestine and Gaza. I feel like there's more to this story than just revenge for the October 7th attack. Help my viewers understand what is really going on in this region, and could this spin off into a much broader, bigger war?
Well, yeah, in the first place, Stephen, absolutely. This could indeed become a world war. We hope it will not, but it's a tinderbox and it could escalate very easily and very quickly. As far as the conflict itself goes, there is a fundamental misunderstanding of it in the West, and uh, that includes both the government, policy analysts, and the people in general. I'll tell you in brief, it's like this. If you read everything that Hamas ever says, every public statement it makes, and every public statement coming out of the Palestinian Authority and Hezbollah and Iran about this issue, they all mention Islam, and they all situate their conflict with Israel in Islamic terms, not just once, but every last statement. And conversely, every last statement coming out of Washington and coming out of the UN and coming out of the European Union regarding this conflict never, ever once mentions Islam. That's a massive cognitive dissonance, a massive disjunction. And in my work, I submit that this is a classic jihad in the sense that Islam teaches what jihad is, which is primarily, although not solely, warfare against unbelievers in order to extend Islamic law over them. And that's why the conflict doesn't ever get resolved. Every president since Jimmy Carter has tried to resolve it. There have been all kinds of peace processes and negotiations, and they never fix anything. And the reason why is because, very simply, the Quran, the holy book of Islam, says, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, it's not actually true that the Palestinians were driven out of what is today the land of Israel, but that is the common mythology among the Palestinian Arabs and the Muslim world in general. And that makes active the divine commandment in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 191. Drive them out from where they drove you out. That is a commandment of Allah, no less important for Muslims than the Ten Commandments are for Jews and Christians. And so, consequently, there's no negotiation, there's no settlement, there's no peace plan that's ever going to bring lasting peace to this region, because there will always be some among Muslims who believe they have a responsibility before the supreme being to drive the Israelis out.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So, just so that I make sure I'm understanding correctly, uh, over in the Middle East, everything goes through the lens of a religious Islamic thought process, right? But then the West tries very hard not to cross that barrier and still write about this, pretending that this doesn't have to do with ancient religious beliefs. Is that right?
That's 100% on the mark.
Okay.
That's exactly it. That the biggest problem the West has is a massive misdiagnosis of this whole situation. And the analysis is all wrong. In the West, if you go to the State Department, you talk to Antony Blinken and everybody else in the State Department, they will tell you this is a conflict over land. The Palestinians say it's their land, the Israelis say it's their land. And so if we find the right compromise, if the Israelis make enough concessions and we establish a Palestinian state, then everything will be okay. That is a fundamentally wrong and flawed analysis, and going on it ever since Jimmy Carter has led us into numerous blind alleys and caused a lot of needless deaths.
Okay, interesting. So, 'cause I see people protesting and saying we need a two-state solution, or there should be, or Israel only wants a one-state solution where they wipe out all the people of Gaza and take it over and put up condominiums. But what you're saying is from Hamas, or maybe from this, just even this religious standpoint, that they would never entertain the idea of a two-state solution because they would be breaking commandment by not driving out the people that drove them out?
Yes and no.
Okay.
In the first place, let's remember that the Palestinian Arabs rejected the UN proposal to establish an Arab state in the land that is now Israel in 1947. And then they rejected it again several times. There were proposals for a Palestinian state, and they rejected them. And they have had numerous opportunities to establish a Palestinian state, which they all turned down because of this imperative, drive them out from where they drove you out. However, at this point, given the political situation today, and all of the authorities of the West lining up to say, we want to give you a state, and they think that will bring peace, it's very possible, if not even likely, that the Palestinian leaders will indeed establish a Palestinian state at this time, but it will not bring peace. It will only be a new base to launch new attacks against what remains of Israel. And the evidence for that is not only in Islamic theology, but also in recent history. You said that people claim that the Israelis want to clear out Gaza and build condominiums. Actually, just the opposite is the case. The Israelis were in Gaza. There were Israeli people who moved to Gaza and were living there. And in 2005, the Israeli government forcibly uprooted thousands of Israelis who were living in Gaza and made them leave their homes and everything they had built there and move back to Israel. And Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, thinking that if they just gave it to the Palestinians without any strings, without any conditions, that there would be peace, that the Gazans couldn't complain about an occupation. There hasn't been a single Israeli in Gaza since 2005. And that did not bring peace. Instead, the Gazans used Gaza as a new launching pad for renewed attacks against Israel. And the same thing would happen if a Palestinian state were established now.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been a hard one for me to cover as news stories regularly, because on the one hand, I believe Israel has the right to defend itself. On the other hand, I'm extremely uncomfortable seeing innocent people killed. But at the same time, I try to see it through like a religious Judeo-Christian lens, where I'm like, okay, wait a minute, we're not supposed to kill and we're supposed to love, but how do you do that when your neighbor's always trying to kill you? And so there's this like trap where I'm not sure what the right answer is to move forward, because it's very hard to love somebody that wishes you and your children dead.
Well, you know, Christianity has never been 100% pacifist and has always recognized not only the right to self-defense, but the responsibility to defend one's family, one's home, and so on, as part of the obligation of charity that one has, that you don't sit back because you're not going to fight and let somebody else kill your family. In some cases, you do have to fight. And also, it's important to keep in mind that when you talk about innocent people being killed, of course, that's something that happens in war, in all wars, and it's a terrible thing. But there are several special considerations here. One is the casualty figures that we have that are being widely disseminated by the establishment media They come from Hamas. The Gaza Ministry of Health is the whole, only, and sole source for the number of casualties in Gaza. There is no other source that is giving numbers. And so when the New York Times and CNN and the European Union and the United Nations and the Biden administration say so many people have been killed in Gaza, they're relying on numbers given to them by Hamas. And Hamas has every reason to inflate the numbers. Hamas has actually been caught lying several times about the numbers of people killed. You may remember that right after October 7th, we heard that Israel had bombed a hospital and 500 people were killed. And then, as it turned out, as time went by, it turned out that the hospital was not bombed, only the parking lot. 500 people were not killed, only 10. Israel did not bomb the hospital parking lot, but Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired a rocket at Israel that misfired and hit the parking lot. And so the initial reports that went out all over the world that probably a lot of people still believe were completely wrong. And Hamas, which amplified them, was actively lying. They, of course, have every reason to inflate the casualty count. Also, I've written an article about this. You can find it PJ Media, and it went through the UN figures for the casualties in Gaza. And those figures come from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is Hamas. And they showed that the lies are right there in the numbers themselves. You don't even have to know any more of the story. For example, say on it's a running tally, and the UN was publishing it every day, and it not only had the total casualty count, but also the number of women and children killed. And it said, for example, these are just hypothetical numbers, just to give you the flavor of what's going on in this kind of information. It said on Tuesday, the total number of people killed was 5,000. And then on Wednesday, the total number of people killed was 5,100. Okay, so 100 people were killed on the one day. And then you look and it says on Tuesday, the number of children, total number of children who've been killed were 3,000. And on Wednesday, the total number of children killed were 3,700. And so it's, in other words, the total number went up by 100 and the number of children killed by 600. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And lies you can see right now on the UN website for the casualties in Gaza, and the figures come from Hamas. Also, Hamas inflates civilian casualties for real by staging attacks from civilian areas in order to draw retaliatory fire that it can use for propaganda purposes. So every civilian killed is a tragedy, but actually it looks as if, from the best estimates, according to a West Point professor, John Spencer, who's no relation to me, but he went to Israel and studied this, to Gaza, and also Richard Kemp, who's a colonel in the British Army. They separately went to investigate the situation, and they have said that Israel takes more precautions to prevent civilian casualties than any military on earth, and that it looks as if the ratio of civilians to combatants killed is 4 to 3, which compares quite favorably to the ratio of civilians to combatants killed by US forces in Iraq a few years ago, which was 9 to 1, which was actually quite better than the civilian to combatant casualty ratio during World War II. So the US vastly improved on the prevention of civilian casualties in Iraq, but Israel has gone them much better and halved even that. And so the number of civilians killed appears to be much lower than what Hamas is claiming, but the figures that the New York Times and CNN and the UN and everybody is putting out all come from Hamas.
Yeah. Would they, let me see if I can think of how I want to say this. Would Hamas be inflating these death numbers to attract more sympathy and money from the United Nations? Or would it be hoping that their Islamic brothers from other surrounding nations would would jump in and attack Israel as well? What would be the underlying reason to inflate those numbers?
This is all about the first choice, that is getting money from the United Nations, but also garnering public popular support. And we've seen how effective that is with people all over the West demonstrating in favor of the Palestinians after October 7th. They think that there's some genocide going on in Gaza. They think that the Palestinians are innocent civilians being bombed in large numbers. And they think this because of what Hamas is telling them. And so it's been a public relations victory for Hamas. They've managed to convince large segments of the population in the West. They do want Muslim countries to come in and fight Israel on their behalf, certainly, but casualty counts are not going to do that. The Muslim countries don't really care about the casualty counts any more than Hamas does. They understand that Hamas is lying. They understand that Hamas wants to inflate civilian casualties by using civilians as human shields because they do the same thing. They will only come in to save Hamas because they have the same imperative, drive them out from where they drove you out, that comes from Islam, from the Quran. And it would be only that that will ultimately get them to move.
Okay, interesting. How does the big country that everybody talks about more than even Palestine and the leaders of Hamas is Iran? How does Iran play into all of this? Are they, because of having a similar religious lens and ideology, do they see themselves as supporting Hamas driving Israel out from where their brothers were driven out? Or is this just about creating chaos or just about attacking Israel?
Well, Iran in the first place, we have to understand that Muslims are primarily Sunnis or Shia, and the Shia are only about 15% of Muslims worldwide. But Iran is a Shiite nation in a sea of Sunni nations, and yet Iran has pretensions of becoming the leader of the entire Islamic world. And it's going to do that by destroying Israel. And then the Sunni nations will see that Iran gets things done and wages jihad more effectively and presumably will accept its leadership. And so Iran is the chief financier of Hamas, which is a Sunni group, but of course is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Also, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is also dedicated to the destruction of Israel, is a wholly owned and operated subsidiary of the Islamic Republic of Iran, founded by Iran, and sent into Lebanon in order to have a force to destroy Israel with. And so the Iranians actually, the Islamic Republic does not have any other beef with Israel. Israel is a small country that does not have any borders with Iran. And Iran would not, in any rational world, care about Israel at all. It's just only because of Islam that Iran cares about Israel. And that's why they want to destroy it. And it's also a very key indication that the Biden administration, contrary to its claims, is not on Israel's side, but wants to see Hamas win. The Biden administration unfroze $10 billion of assets for the Islamic Republic of Iran after October 7th. And so it's the Biden administration that's financing Hamas's war against Israel right now.
Yeah, I know Biden's getting tremendous pushback here in the United States, especially among younger Americans. Switching to a different president, though, Donald Trump establishes over a long period of time these Abraham Accords. Were those good for the Middle East? And with this war, is it unraveling all of that effort that went into trying to bring this region closer together through trade?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea was to establish common cause between Israel and some of the Sunni states by recognizing that they have a common enemy in Iran and that they would be stronger together working against this common foe. Excuse me. And so the Saudis were actually about to join this accord because they're deeply threatened by Iran in numerous ways when the strikes against Israel took place on October 7th. And it looks as if the Islamic Republic of Iran calculated that they could stymie efforts to bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together by striking against Israel at that time, because then the Saudis wouldn't be caught dead allying with Israel when Hamas is at war with Israel and it's become this entire Islamic conflict. And so here again, Islam plays a key role in understanding the region, and that's the one thing that Western policymakers refuse to examine. And so the Abraham Accords, unfortunately, they're against Islam, essentially. They are pragmatic accords based on the current situation. But they were from the beginning under pressure from Islamic hardliners who said that it was against Islam for Muslims to ally with the Jews of Israel. And because the Quran says the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. That's in chapter 5, verse 82. So there's no way that they could survive the pressure from Islam, from the Islamic hardliners. It's just that because the Sunni states recognized that there was an immediate threat from Iran, they were able to set aside the Islamic imperative. But then Iran activated it again, essentially by triggering this war between Hamas and Israel and forcing the Sunni states, excuse me, to declare their allegiance to Hamas. Sorry. And that puts the future of the Abraham Accords in doubt.
Okay. Final question. I appreciate you coming on. You've got a book out, The Palestinian Delusion. Tell us what that's about and what people will learn by reading it.
Yeah, the Palestinian Delusion is a history of the Middle East peace process. It gives background to it, going back all to the beginning of Israel, really, but I mean of not just a modern Israel, but the ancient presence in Israel going back to time immemorial. But really starts with the Camp David Accords and showing that Jimmy Carter was enthralled with Anwar Sadat, pressed the Israelis for various concessions, which they readily gave in exchange for promises of peace. But those promises have been repeatedly broken, shows that all the peace processes after that failed, and that ultimately the reason for this is, as I've explained, because of Islamic imperatives that nobody really wants to recognize.
Okay. Well, let's hope, Robert, that this thing doesn't spin out of control. You know, there's all this worry about the Russia-Ukraine war, but I see this tinderbox in the Middle East being much more dangerous for uh, an extended and growing conflict in the region. So let's hope that that isn't the case. Thank you so much for coming on and helping my audience better understand this information. I'm going to put a link to your book down below, but if people want to follow you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. It's been nice talking to you. And I'm at jihadwatch.org. That's JIHAD watch.org, which is updated many times daily with news and commentary about jihad activity of all kinds in the US and around the world. And also at Jihad Watch RS on Twitter. I've got 27 books on jihad and a couple of other topics here and there. And those you can find at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and wherever there's still bookstores, if there are any left. And so that's I appreciate also if people could support on Patreon so we can keep going.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.